guys do lots of editing, so yeah, all good.
Actually, you know what? Our expertise is uploading constantly and just in raw format, and it actually works great. And this is episode, I think, believe 124. So, Abhay, it's totally awesome to have you here. I know it's kind of like a hectic week for you because I've seen the proposal hit, I don't know, one something. So I imagine this is the reason why we have we needed to reschedule. But it's awesome that you're able to make it to 10 a.m. I think this is the first time you're in actually in a Spanish-speaking podcast, but even though we're doing it in English, it's just, I imagine it's the first time that you actually appear as a guest in one of those. But the reason for that being is that we're just a bunch of aficionados that are super interested. I actually have my IoT machine here. I actually have a bunch of them. Dario has one in his house. I actually have a couple of 5Gs in Fort Lauderdale and one in Miami. So you're talking to a good set of very curious individual people. So let me introduce you. So Dario and Gordo, they're like the co-hosts. And my friend Peter, he's just an expert in telecommunications. So we just wanted to take like a deep dive because since we learned about Helium, and this has been almost 1-2 years ago. I think almost every single one of us has purchased, if not the Saga and also the Seeker. One of the things that I have found the most interesting is that the best way to take advantage of the blockchain is to actually use a service that you do not know runs on the blockchain. And so that is actually something super cool. And we started realizing this a few months or years ago. And so I onboarded a ton of friends that had no idea of Solana, Bitcoin, and Ethereum because I showed them an app that was called StepN. And StepN, it was just this app where you could make $100, $300. Back in the heyday, I even made like $500 walking for 90 minutes. And so when people start realizing the functionalities, the credit card that you can load with crypto, and then when you see a service that you just switch and it's better than T-Mobile and it's better than many other things that you're accustomed to, you're like, man, I should definitely take a deeper dive and look into it. And so that was like a quick introduction before you actually introducing yourself. So before we get into the weeds, I wanted we shortly met in Singapore. I said hi to you when we were going at this party at Joe McCann's the Hire event. But I want you to give us a quick introduction why you ended heading the Helium Foundation, and you've been in startups in San Francisco for most of your life. I used to live in San Francisco. Why don't you give us a quick background, and then we start asking questions around what Helium is and what's the importance and significance of what Deepin is, and why I think this could be one of the biggest onboarding tools to the world of the blockchain.
Yeah, for sure. I'll give you the sort of shortest possible background info, and then we'll focus more on Helium, of course. Like, I'm Abhay. I've been, as you said, been in startups since too long. I guess I moved out to the Bay Area back in 2006 to essentially join this kind of crazy environment where people were just building, and that is what I love doing. I'm an engineer. I like writing software and I like making products. Like that's really ultimately what I enjoy doing. I've spent time building search systems, payment systems. I work for a small natural language search company that was acquired many years ago. I've worked before that, I worked for a data company. And then after search, I worked on payments. I was at Square for almost 6 years, building pretty much everything relating to how money moves, and got to work on all the different parts of the stack. And so, yeah, like I've been doing the startup thing for a while. Helium, I actually found initially because I was at home mid-COVID, and I found this thing called the hotspot, and I put it on my roof. That's how I found Helium. I'm a dev and I'm a hotspot owner. That's how I started, right? Like I'm not part of the founding team, like anything like that. And I think that's something that I'm pretty proud of. And I think that's something that really is quite interesting about the Helium community as a whole is I think that there are folks who, really come wanting to build, have ideas, and they build it. And that's something that hopefully I'm an example of, and that's something that I intend to keep doing. So yeah, I've been at this since late 2019, and seen everything from the initial IoT hotspot, how it was built, how it was deployed, our move to take the blockchain off of these things. I was part of that process. Our move to Solana, our launch of the mobile network, launch of 2 tokens, and as you mentioned, like there's a proposal out there now to roll back to a single token. So like I've seen all the different sort of iterations of this network and this project. I've been lucky to be kind of leading this protocol effort, but the protocol is really it's a small but very important part, obviously, of the entire Helium ecosystem. I think the Helium ecosystem is this sort of base protocol, and then it's the apps that are built on top of it, like things like Helium Mobile, right? The fact that you can buy a $20 a month phone plan in the US and have unlimited talks, text, and data, like that's only possible because of the protocol. It's only possible because of the community. Those are the 2 sort of foundational pieces. And then, you can start to build really interesting apps. The reason why you can have, a tracker inside of the barrels of a rick house in Kentucky, making sure that the quality of that whiskey that's being produced is tracked from the moment it was put in the barrel all the way to the moment that it hits a bottle. Like that's only possible when you have a ubiquitous, cheap IoT network, right? And so these are all the kinds of things that I've been really excited to be a part of. But yeah, like that's the quick background. These days, what do? I run the protocol, I work on economics, and it's the same thing I did starting in 2019. The job hasn't changed much, to be honest.
With that short bio, a whole bunch of questions were triggered, and probably the most interesting one is that our group, which started as a chat and then evolved into a podcast, has always been there to share ideas and knowledge. And the things that we try to identify is what's the next trend? What is the next trend that is going to give you the most amount of alpha? And one thing that we have in common agreement is that if you want to spot what's the next important thing, then you got to look at what the hobbyists are doing during the weekends. And so you basically described that you bought a hotspot and you set it up on your house. What was it that you were reading or trying to understand that made you buy a hotspot? I don't know why we did it, but we did the same thing. And this is miles away from where you can buy it on Amazon. Here we have to wait for international customs, but I can tell you, and here's the surprising thing. When we bought it and we connected the IoT hotspot with it's going to be the only 5 IoT hotspots in Medellin. No, dude, there's like 150 or 200 IoT hotspots in Medellin. I'm like, how can that be? Could it be just because we're just a big and open city? And then I try to corroborate. Peter is in Bogota. You see hotspots in Bogota. I'm like, how is this even possible? So it intrigues me. What was it that you were doing, and what was it that other people that like us? I mean, I was early in Bitcoin 2013. I don't like Ethereum. Then I jumped to Solana, and then I started going through a set of tokens, SPO. I'm like, oh, this is interesting. And I'm always being curious about if you should have like an ASCII miner, if you need to set up a validator. By the way, it's super difficult for us to set up a validator because you should have to stake, I don't know, 20,000, 30,000 Solana, so it's quite expensive. But what was it that you were doing that you ended up on a hotspot? Because it's the mind and that level of curiosity that intrigues me, and which I think it's very important to share in the podcast, because follow whatever the hobbyist is doing during the weekends, because that is what's the trend of the new things going to be.
Yeah, I mean, I think this idea of internet being just connectivity, just being kind of a basic right, is something that I felt for a very long time. I actually think it came from my time at Square, where we thought that like commerce was sort of a very basic like human right, and I felt very strongly about local commerce being sort of really, really important, right? I want to buy stuff from, my neighbors, the like local farmers, like the local food trucks. Like these are the places where I believe like, we should be spending a lot of our time. And so connectivity for me was a very natural extension. So when we moved into my house that I'm in right now, there was no fiber in this neighborhood, and there still isn't fiber in this neighborhood.
Where in San Francisco?
I'm in San Francisco, right? Isn't that insane that there is no like fiber in some parts, right?
Internet
wild.
is better here than sometimes in San Francisco. It's wild.
That's wild, right? And that's like, should show you something about the nature of the existing ways of building connectivity, right? That's actually maybe the sort of real thing there. And so, of course I went and did the research, like what would it take to get fiber to my home? And I spoke to the sort of typical cable provider here, and they said, yeah, well, we'll cost you like $10,000 to do the build out, we'll bring it up your hill, and once it's there, then we can connect you to that fiber. We could do like a GPON handoff. Like, okay. So I asked the very obvious next question, which was, once you put it in my house, do all my neighbors also get to have fiber connectivity? And they're like, yeah, of course, we'll like totally, be able to support them as well. And so then like in my head, I went, hold on. So I'm effectively subsidizing you going and getting more customers. That's insanity, right? And that sort of like, it triggered me at that point. Many years before that, there was this like common thing that you could do if you had like a wireless service, like a cell phone service, like, oh, you don't have great phone service in your house, we'll sell you a box that uses your home internet to give you better phone connectivity.
Yeah.
Right. Like these gateways, these residential gateways, that they would sell you for the privilege of having your own phone service in your house. And like that kind of mentality, the sort of value extractive mentality, is something that I just like, in my heart of hearts, just cannot accept. So what did I do instead? So I told you, like, there's a fiber option. I said, absolutely not. Instead, I found a local wireless ISP, and I said, hey, like, I'll give you roof access if you give me good internet. And so our deal is I run a couple of microwave antennas on my roof. We're part of a mesh, and I get half a gigabit to my house, which is more than enough for me. And the antenna receives like 2 gigabits upstream. I think now it's like 4, and redistributes that to 180 other houses in the neighborhood because I have line of sight to a bunch of other houses. That's Helium. Like, this is 10 years ago, right? Like, and this is why it was interesting. When I heard about Helium, I was like, this is the same thing. This is exactly what I've wanted all along.
And this is what I like to have this type of a conversation with individuals that have been into entrepreneurs, because you start to see kind of like detect patterns of how people behave. And so when you were describing that you were seeing people with the square swipe terminal, you realize, well, if they have access to a financial system, why couldn't people with just a box have access to communication? And that's what actually helps you identify patterns of where to invest. Let me tell you a story. One of the reasons I understood why Solana was important was not because Anatoly was explaining that he was just building machines to be the fastest composable machine that runs at the speed of what physically is possible. It's because long ago I heard a podcast where Chris Sacca from Lowercase Capital, which used to work for Larry Page. Larry Page told him, I don't know, early, say 2000s, told him, you know what, you need to go and buy every single data center in the US without letting Microsoft know that they were buying this. And the whole purpose of that was so that Google could index the most amount of pages so that you couldn't crawl and get search results. So I'm not saying that they're equivalent, but I understand when you say I was working at Stripe, I saw these boxes, and now I have the same problem of telecommunications that can be, I don't know, unbundled because I am just a multiplier, and because I am a multiplier, I should also get some benefit, not just the corporate of the telco company that was providing you the fiber optic. No, I'll just give you good internet. So it makes total sense. Total sense.
Me and the 100+ other houses in sort of our little like section of this like local network graph, we pay $30 a month for internet, and we get high-speed internet, right? Which in in other parts of the world, that's like, oh, that's cheap, right? No, like in the United States, that's actually like insanely cheap for broadband access. Which again, like to your point earlier, like it's funny that even in San Francisco, we have this kind of inequality of access.
With Dario, we've interviewed a ton of people, but there's this Latin VC who has very strong opinions about technology. And whenever we're like bullish on Twitter saying, hey, look, Solana is doing this, and he basically reduces it like, no, you're a bunch of speculators that just like prices going up and prices going down. Show me a real case use scenario, and then I might change my mind into the user's application. The first real case use that I showed him was actually Helium. And so one of the things that I want you to explain is why a blockchain is necessary to give people access to what is commonly known as a cell phone wireless data service. Why can this happen? Because there's a blockchain helping distribute or multiply the effect of the service. Because he said, well, that's just, you could have easily done this. You don't need a blockchain. And you're totally wrong. You need a blockchain to make that happen. Why do you need a blockchain for Helium to exist?
Maybe you can, and maybe there's and I'll take his case. Like I'll take the Steelman case for a moment. There is possibly a way to do this without a blockchain, but there are some like base requirements. Number one, you need value alignment, right? Can you ensure that there's like ultimately value alignment to outside to the end users who are actually asking for service and the service providers who are providing that service, and then any intermediaries that are along the way who are maybe like part of that service being provided, right? If you have 100% like alignment onto all of those folks, which means that each one of them gets something out of this, then it's possible, right? That's one. Number two, you need insanely fast, like you need some kind of insanely fast market that allows you to determine like here's a buyer and here's a seller of capacity. Let's just use that like as a very, very generic way of thinking about it. And is there a way to like reach a market clearing price very, very quickly? And then the third thing is that you need some amount of censorship resistance or permissionlessness in the system, right? Allow anyone to be able to join either as a provider of service or a consumer of service, and manage their identities and all the things that are going with it. Like, can I build a centralized system that does all those things? Maybe. Like, I think there's definitely a possibility of doing that. Is a blockchain the best way to enable that today? I think absolutely yes. Right. Speed, fast markets.
Yeah, that's what you're saying. The alignment is in essence consensus. And the only way you can reach consensus at scale is if you use a blockchain. Otherwise, you don't have that, right?
Yeah, exactly. So speed of consensus, alignment of incentives, and permissionlessness, right? Like all those three things are things how blockchain technology can like enables this. And I think it's a better way to building these kinds of networks. And that's the experiment that we're all running. For what it's worth. Like, have we decided that this is true? We don't know yet, right? Like the total actual addressed market here is still very, very small. And I think, I'm not ready to sort of ring the bell that we've succeeded yet. Like I think we have orders of magnitude of sort of customers to acquire before we're there. But I think this is a novel way of doing things and getting us to where we want to be. And I think that the other ways of doing things actually make it harder to sort of get to this. And that's really the sort of two parts of it for me.
You said basically consensus and alignment, but consensus and alignment is actually a tool to reach scale. And scale is very important because it just allows you to do things at a lower cost. If you were going to do a parallel between, I don't know, let's call it a T-Mobile, Viacom, Sprint, Orange, Movistar, Telefonica, whoever the company is, if they wanted to reach X amount of users, what would be like the traditional deployment from a capex perspective that they would need to do, let's say, to cover, I don't know, half of the Miami-Dade County? And what is the capex deployment that something that uses a consensus to multiply the effort of different individuals that are connected? What is kind of like difference? Because I imagine cell phone towers going from here to there, and here you just have little machines, routers. We should get a little bit into the weeds of what the machines and the routers and what is it that they do, sure, which is just basically the amplification. But if we could put it in a relative form that you could say it's 10 times, 100 times more expensive, and that's why consensus is so good, because it reduces the capex of the expansion.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hard to exactly like model the exact, like, is it 10 times cheaper or 10 times faster or 10 times better yet, because we haven't seen the experiment bear itself out yet, right? Like we are talking, like, let's think about Helium Mobile specifically.
Yes.
We're talking about, 100,000 subscribers deployed, between, they're using T-Mobile coverage and they're using the thousands of hotspots that are out there. And that is I would say that's a proof of concept so far. That's still small, right? For an MVNO, that's a very small subscriber base. And so, I think that, have we reached a point where I would say that we are absolutely like, successful? No, of course not. And that's kind of what I mean by, like, the number of humans in the world is just, orders of magnitude above the numbers that we're talking about right now. Right. And I think that, like, truly knowing that we can get to that coordination at humans population scale, like, that will take some time. Obviously we're accelerating that timeline, but I think that it really just comes down to, like, are we able to execute on this roadmap in order to get to that, like, human population scale? Now, I think it might be worth it to think about, like, what does it take to get individuals connectivity in the United States? And this is, like, somewhat measurable, right? Like, because we have the stats on this. We have the sort of broadband investment that has, allegedly been happening over the last several years in the United States, and the sort of billions and trillions of dollars that have been put into that, primarily to run a whole lot of copper and a whole lot of fiber to a lot of places. To get a single rural site connectivity, broadband connectivity, we're talking tens of thousands of dollars. I mean, to get my house, like $10,000. That's like that's sort of the scale that we're talking about, and that's just not possible in my mind, right? Like, you can't actually build broadband for everybody using sort of the traditional model of deploying these things. I also wonder if there's a future here where there's really, like, only two ways of connecting. There's satellite to ground, and then there's ground to out, right? Like, that probably feels like where we're headed, if you take, one view of it. And I'm not talking about any particular actors right now. I'm not saying it's Starlink and Helium necessarily, but it's, Starlink-esque maybe, or Helium-esque, right? Like, I think these are the sort of ways that I think make sense, given what's been happening in sort of need and the demand on the sort of connectivity side, and, like, the real cost that exists for the traditional way of deploying this kind of infrastructure. Like, do we feel that that's definitely the way? We'll see, to be seen, right? But, like, I think that is a viable endpoint for this, and I think, with the right investment in technology, I think that we can get there. So, do we want to spend hundreds of billions of dollars again on, let's say whatever 6G is, or given that we already spent hundreds of billions of dollars, like, deploying 5G in a lot of places, and we still don't have that kind of utilization yet? Or is there a better way to build, correct, like, the correct product for the actual individual users? And that's ultimately what I think about, which is, what is the product that's being demanded? It's, broadband connectivity on any device wherever I am, if I'm in my house, or if I'm outside, in a park, or if I'm in a mall, or if I'm in a stadium, or wherever I'm going.
So we are the ones in the third world country, and you basically no electricity, no phone.
How ridiculous!
It's amazing. You're making us look very, very good. Silicon Valley.
I think it's scripted.
Silicon Valley is falling apart.
It was
Actually,
scripted, for sure.
This one's self-inflicted, for what it's worth. We have construction at the house, and so the construction guys pulled the wrong circuit breaker. But it is what it is. It's still.
It's okay.
I mean, the comedic timing is, like, perfect, though.
No, it's cool. It's like, oh yeah, you're gonna fail. And we're in Colombia, and we had bad connection, but it's San Francisco where the internet, the companies in artificial intelligence, and you're the one that drops. Amazing. All right. So going back to,
I wasn't intentional, I promise.
No, but it's actually, it just makes for good humor, a good joke.
Yeah, of course. Of course.
All right. So I think I was asking, let's talk a little bit of the mechanics, and you tell me if I get this wrong. So basically, I don't know, one of the telcos provides me with internet here. And so I buy either a modem for 5G or IoT. And what I do is I hook it to my internal internet in the house. And what it does, it starts to distribute a little bit of the internet. So if someone has a cell phone and they have Helium outside, but they don't have a data plan, they're taking advantage of the internet that I am actually distributing to them so that they can browse the internet, make a call. And if it's an IoT, well, I don't know. You know what's amazing? The IoT, sometimes we see them like sending signals like 8 kilometers away. So the IoT is just helping that sensor in the tarmac of the airport read that the tarmac is 85 degrees Fahrenheit, and that information is later on uploaded to Yahoo Weather or whatever it is. So that in essence, what we're doing is we're just distributing a little bit of what we have internet paid for on our service, and we redistribute it. And the counter benefit is that we get a little bit of tokens. We get IoT, we get mobile, and that's technically how it works. So it basically means I can make money from the non-used internet that I have in the house. And I can also make money if I'm like navigating roads on my cell phone, because that's one of my friends does. And like, I leave the Helium machine and it's mapping out X. Well, obviously we don't have Helium mobile here. So I haven't worked with that service very well, but that is basically the mechanic. Am I missing something else?
No, that's roughly it, right? You have some kind of capacity. You have coverage that you're willing to give. You're willing to put your hardware and provide your physical infrastructure for that to enable the package that landed on that plane that just landed, so that the shipper who sent that package knows that package arrived in Colombia before FedEx will tell them that it arrived in Colombia, right? And that's incredibly valuable and I'm just talking about the IoT use case. On the mobile use case, if I and the 40,000 other fans leave the Chase Center here in San Francisco and I'm trying to get an Uber, like obviously every single cell phone tower that's around there is getting absolutely slammed right on the way out. And so, if someone who lives across the street is able to provide coverage to that plaza that's right outside the Chase Center, they are able to provide value to these folks that need access, right? That have a demand I think a really cool, kind of personally for me, like sort of project that happened just a few weeks ago, or now a few months ago, was when the hurricanes hit the Southeast here in the US. There were folks that were on the ground deploying Helium mobile hotspots with Starlink backhaul on the top of the back of a truck as they're going in to help serve that community. Like that is incredible, right? Like being able to very rapidly deploy that kind of coverage for hundreds of folks who need it, I think is really, really, it's crucial, right? And what did I think about when we saw that? One, we need more of those, right? Natural disasters unfortunately continue to happen, and they will continue to happen, and we need to be prepared for them. But two, that truck could also just as well be useful for like a music festival, right? For something that's not in a typical area. Existing, like it is a normal thing for existing telco providers to sort of run temporary towers to areas where there's a need. This is effectively that, right? Except it's a lot more compact. It's sort of a lot easier to do, and then anyone can do it, right? They don't need to do it themselves. The existing telco doesn't need to do it themselves. A local could have a setup ready to go, and they can just go deploy it whenever it's needed. And that's sort of, in my mind, the sort of value alignment that I think really needs to that crypto enables. It's the individual is able to provide that service for anyone permissionlessly, and provide either the sort of rapid deployments, maybe the kind of on-demand deployments when there's something like think like Uber surge, effectively, like there's a surge for data, or consistent deployment, something that's always fixed, something that's always there in a mall or in a coffee shop or something like that. All three of these things are possible with Helium.
You mentioned Peter, you mentioned the hurricane, and my entrepreneurial spirit starts to lighten up because we live in a topography that is just broken by mountains, and so getting good access to the internet, it's very complicated here. But I was thinking, and this is a question for you, Peter, because you know a lot about this. What if we were to go to every little rural town that it's 500, 600 people that we know they don't have internet? We just we just buy one single Starlink and we deploy, 5, 6 hotspots, and boom, they have internet. And what's interesting is that you could have the full force of the government, and nothing would happen. But with just the technology, Starlink is available here. It costs, I don't know, $500. You go, you hook it up, line of sight to the sky, buy 5G modems, and that's it. Boom. Everybody has internet in every single, and how many towns of 500 people do we have in Colombia? I don't know. What's the current coverage of cell phones and data in Colombia, Peter? You should know by top of your head.
The coverage of cell phone penetration is almost 90-something%.
Okay, cell phone 97, but internet is not that in the small towns.
No, internet, because internet is given what you were saying. I mean, geographically, it's very complicated to get to all the parts of the country. And we have in Colombia, coming from a traditional telco, we have copper and we got fiber. Fiber is relatively new for Colombia. It's been, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 years maybe, and the one of the questions that I had for you, Abhay, was, given that you're codependent on fiber in some cases. I know you had some partnerships in other countries, in Latin America, maybe Mexico. You did a partnership with Movistar. I don't know how is that rolling out towards other countries, given that there's, I don't know if it's regulatory issues or it's partnership issues, because you, of course, could be. There's a partnership that you could make both companies bigger and better. So from
Sure.
that standpoint, how do you feel, or how do you work on with companies that are fiber providers that eventually see you reselling their product, even though the user isn't using 100% of its product?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think there's sort of two things there. I think two salient questions that I'm hearing. One, how's Mexico going? Like, it's a brand new partnership. It's a pilot. 2 cities, Oaxaca and Mexico City only, and very limited sites there. And what Movistar, what they wanted to see is, how can this kind of network build out supplement their existing coverage, right? Like, one of the things that they need to figure out is, how do they serve their customers directly? And so, I think we don't have any specific news on this yet, but it seems so far we've seen very positive uptake here, and there is a lot of interest in expanding that partnership to other parts of Mexico, and then that I see as almost like a template of what something like this could look like in other countries as well. Given that we can start in Mexico and kind of follow down the continents. I think that's there's one of the things I've learned a lot about. Well, I learned this first in payments, but now I'm learning this about this in connectivity, is that payments and connectivity are very simple because there's a lot of local kind of ways of doing things, right? In payments, it's like many different payment types. In connectivity, it's what are the kinds of relationships that people have with their connectivity provider, right? And they're very different in different countries, right? In the US, you typically have one carrier, everything runs on that one. But for example, my family's from India. You might have like 2, 3 SIMs on your phone. You might have a data SIM and a phone SIM, and they're completely independent of each other. And that's actually way more standard in the rest of the world, compared to the US is, I think, somewhat unique to have like a lot of, let's call it loyalty, like only one SIM. I think that's something that we are seeing, at least in Mexico, as something that's worth continuing to explore, and hopefully we'll come down to Colombia as well, because I think that's an opportunity, right? Like, I think Mexico will be a lot more like Colombia than certainly the US will be. Like, our strategy in the US, I don't think necessarily works in Colombia for a variety of reasons. Now, as far the other thing that you mentioned that was kind of interesting, that it's getting connectivity to these like 400 or 500, rural
towns,
rural villages. It's actually it reminds me of how connectivity rolled out in India many years ago, right? So when running copper through rural areas in India was hard, right? Like, you have everything from power outages to lightning strikes taking out trees that knock over a phone line. You can't necessarily trench these things. It's tough to do this in a scalable way. And what phone companies realized that they could do instead is they could build a phone, and this is sort of the UX thing that I was sort of alluding to. You can build a phone that looks exactly like the normal phone that you have, and put it on the desk, but don't actually have a wire plugged into it. No copper wire. It's actually just a little 3G modem inside, right? And that was like a huge unlock, I think, for a large part of India, where they were basically like home handsets that had nothing to do with copper, right? They were just 3G phones, but and so for someone like my grandparents, that was very, very accessible. Then that's really where the user experience part comes in, right? I think there's a similar opportunity now, with Starlink and, hopefully new providers in the future, but Starlink is so far ahead in my opinion, like to provide these like local shops in, every one of these 300-400 person towns has like the shop, right? Like the one convenience store, the one place where you go buy vegetables, where you maybe refill your SIM plan, maybe you pick up fuel if you need gas or something like that. This is like common in India, at least. Like everyone has one of these like stores in their town. Like you go there also for connectivity, right? You go there, and that's a sort of, I think, a central point for connectivity to sort of build out. And you think of these as like a hub and spoke model. So you put a Starlink terminal on there, you put 3 or 4 Helium hotspots around it, and now you have connectivity for that area, and then you can slowly build out from there. And I think that's a strategy that doesn't require fiber to be trenched all the way over to that town. And I think that is an interesting way of continuing to build networks and connectivity to these folks, because they will have cell service, right? Like the macro towers are awesome for providing phone coverage, right? There's no question. You can put giant antennas on top of mountains and blanket a valley and provide like really good voice quality, like no question. And that's, where the 90+% comes from. And I think that's awesome, and that we should have that as well. But, for high broadband, like high bandwidth data, you need another way of getting, connectivity to these places.
I want to be conscious of your time, so I only have 2 more questions, and maybe Peter has a couple more, and then we close. But you said you have about 100,000 current subscribers to Helium. Let's say that's the order of magnitude. I was thinking, Dario, and you please help me correct this. What's the current floating tourist population of Medellin? I bet you it's about 100,000, if not 150,000. All of them, you do not understand how complicated it is for anyone that gets here. Either they have to do their international roaming, which is in many cases expensive. They have to go to the local providers and do the SIM card, and the goofy paperwork they ask for is just ludicrous. But what if they could just, like, I have Helium, I go there, and I know, I don't know, maybe 6-7 friends that own hotels. We put 5G, and with 5-10, I don't know what's the proportion for X amount of people, but you could immediately get like 150,000 people using Helium. The question is, other than having an alignment with the telcos, what needs to happen in order to make that, let's say, test pilot possible?
I mean, not much. So we published this thing that allowed hotspots to be onboarded without, like in a permissionless way, specifically data-only hotspots on the mobile network. And so far, I think the docs only support ubiquity gear, which is pretty expensive. But essentially, any passpoint-enabled Wi-Fi hotspot. These are usually like prosumer to pro level APs, like Cisco's, Meraki's, Ubiquity, all those things. Almost all of them support Passpoint. If you can get the Passpoint config on there, it can immediately support Helium Mobile, and then all you need is a Helium Mobile like eSIM, like you're good to go, or Wi-Fi server. That's really it. And like we could probably slap together pilot in like a weekend, in my opinion.
Wow! And how much is one of those hotspots? Like $500, $1,500? What's the average?
I mean, the APs that are like a couple $100 for like a good Ubiquity AP, and I'm sure you can get it cheaper at scale. So I think a lot of hotels specifically are kind of interesting because they already have to have some kind of Wi-Fi infrastructure for the hotel itself. So really, you're just enhancing the existing Wi-Fi infrastructure. You're not changing it. You don't need to rip anything out or replace anything. So assuming that they already have like a Cisco setup or a Meraki or like a Ubiquity setup or something like that, which they probably do, it's really just a matter of like who's their IT person and are they willing to try something, right? And so it's worth a shot. And I think one of the things that I'd love to figure out is how do we enable non-Helium mobile subscribers to pay for data on just Helium hotspots, right? And so this is, you don't get a phone plan. It's essentially a secondary SIM just for data wherever there's helium coverage, and you just pay directly on chain. You don't actually have to like ask somebody for permission for that. And that's something that's like worth like, it'll take some time to build it out, but like you pull up the Helium mobile, the wallet app, like the black app that you might use for your hotspots, you press a button, it issues a Wi-Fi cert on your phone, and now you can connect to any Helium hotspot that's out there, and you're paying directly. That's kind of interesting to me, and pay per use effectively.
So we finish with this podcast, and the first thing I'm going to do is share it on the chat. They just say, hey, who wants in to do a small pilot? And maybe we invite you down here, because I think it's one of the few cities that actually has good enough density and bad internet for if you don't have a data plan. That would be the perfect case example. And so I think that's pretty cool. That could be very doable. The last question from my side is, I scratch a little bit my head trying to figure out tokenomics. And so I got HNT. Like, I understand that's where the alignment, the consensus happened. Mm-hmm. But then I got the IoT. And when I got the devices to mine, well, to do IoT, I'm like, oh, maybe I'm going to get HNT. No, I'm getting AOT. And I even think there was another token before, but I don't remember. And then I do the mobile, the 5G, and then I got the mobile one. How do you think about the tokenomics? How do you balance it out? Right? Because I also have invested in startups, and the single most painful thing that I found out is thinking about a good, solid tokenomics model. It's just complicated. Is it utility? Is it governance? How do you deal with it? Because I haven't seen it easy, and you are guys the experts. How do you balance it out?
I mean, experts is saying a lot. I appreciate that. I think we've been trying this for one of the longest times, at least certainly for this physical infrastructure stuff. I mean, this is exactly why HIP 138, which is like in what I think is a final draft form as of this morning, exists, right? The return to HNT, I think is a necessary evolution. I think we tried this thing where we sort of effectively created two separate tokens, one for each of these networks, so that they could have their own governance, so that they could have their own protocol emissions, so they could do all the things that they need to do independently of HNT. But ultimately, HNT was the one token that you need to use the network, right? You burn HNT to create data credits. Data credits are how you spend for sensor traffic or for gigabyte traffic, mobile, and that was the sort of initial vision, was that HNT was the sort of demand side token, and IoT and mobile are this governance and supply side token, right? That's like rough, and the way the structure works was that the HNT was always redeemable, right? So if you have IoT, you can always redeem HNT for it. If you have mobile, you can always redeem HNT for it. And that was the initial design, and it was also designed to support a variety of networks, right? So if you had 50 networks in the future, right, the subtoken model actually makes a whole lot of sense. You need some kind of way to align all these sort of disparate island communities effectively together. I think you're right. One of the things that you've pointed out is that creates a lot of complexity. The outsider goes, well, I don't know which one is which. Like, what am I earning? Like, am I earning IoT? Am I earning mobile? What can I do with that? Should I just swap it? Like, these are all the sort of standard questions. And I think the complexity was correct in my mind, given that we sort of there was this idea of having all this sort of independence, and it was either a lack of education or like ultimately like a need to evolve that tokenomic design that I think is now at this point forcing us to go back to HNT. And I think that's the right thing to do, and I'm very much in support of sort of bringing everything back to HNT. And that's the proposal that's out there today, which I think is which hopefully we'll go to a vote in the next couple of days. We'll see what the community thinks. We've been very, very community oriented since the start, and like, we'll see. So at the end of this, you might just be earning HNT again on your IoT hotspot.
In old school engineering, there's a saying, but I don't remember the name. You remember back in the day when you had the 747s with 4 engines, 2 on each side? Someone realized, you know what? Let's just make 2 big, powerful engines, because it's easier to maintain them. It's easier to spec them out. It's easier to understand how 2 things operate than 4 things at any given time. You augment the probability of something happening and going wrong when you just add more engines. So I'm not saying that it translates, but it could be the case. Peter, you had one last question for Abhay, and
Yeah, sure. Coming from a traditional telco, I guess my question is more with regards to your vision on where you will go. Because here's the thing, I think traditional telcos have to evolve, because right now our value proposition is very codependent on the quality and the coverage of your signal. Where is in your country that you are? I mean, like we were saying just before, Colombia is it's a little bit more difficult due to the geographical situation that we have in Colombia. And these options that you bring are obviously very good to, better our coverage. With regards to, in that sense, I think what we're trying to say is we need to migrate to a different value proposition. Do you see traditional telcos and Helium working together to make that value proposition as one, or do you see eventually that it's going to be some sort of competition at the end of the day?
I mean, I think there's no way to build a network without the collaboration, and that's what we're already seeing today, right? Like in the US, we're building it with T-Mobile. In Mexico, we're building it with Movistar, right? I think a lot of the conversations I am fortunate to have, is with other countries and other local operators, trying to understand how to integrate this kind of community-oriented network building with their existing footprint, their network footprint, in order to ultimately, we're all trying to get the same thing, which is connect every single human, right? That's all we want, and give them the sort of product that they want. And so I think, you're right that the sort of traditional way of thinking needs to evolve. Obviously, we will push the envelope very, very hard on the evolution. Maybe uncomfortably so for some, and that's okay. That's the requirement of innovation, right? Like there will always be someone at the tip of the spear, and then we'll sort of move the shift the Overton window over, right? Like that's what we should really be doing. And I think that ultimately, it is going to be collaborative. I think there still needs to be, for a lot of people, it comes down to a user experience problem. Like I speak in these terms a lot because I think it's everything ultimately is a product problem. You're using engineering or using finance or using, operations or using whatever other tools that we have to sort of ultimately serve a product. And so, I think ultimately there are always going to be users that want to have that provider that they can call when something goes wrong. Right, ultimately, that's the sort of customer experience there. There's some folks want high touch, and some folks want low touch. Some folks want to be completely, crypto anarchist. Maybe I lean slightly more on that side, but I think there are folks like me who want to be able to open up my wallet, pay or create a streaming payment effectively, so that whenever I touch a hotspot, that hotspot gets paid, right, wherever it is in the world. That's the vision for me, but I know that's not a vision that's shared across the population. So I think it's important to sort of meet people where they are. And so, some of these organizations that have, they have brand awareness, they have customer acquisition and customer management, that exists, and they will also exist. And I think what I hope for a lot of the traditional telco companies is that they come along and they use this kind of network to sort of supplement their coverage, right? The reality is my local cable provider didn't have coverage exactly where I am. If they worked with that WISP already, they would have had coverage exactly where I am. So when I went to them first, they would have been like, I can't give you fiber, but I can give you really, really great broadband very easily. We'll take care of it, right? And that's sometimes that's the customer experience that's needed. And so, yeah, really the question is how much the layers of abstraction create a better user experience in some cases, but for those who want to have the raw user experience, give it to us as well. And that's where we sort of work together.
Okay. That has been fantastic, Abhay. I want to be respectful of your time. We're going to stop recording, but give me 2 more minutes and don't hang up, please.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm here.